Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be talking all about my favorite fantasy and sci-fi books that I read in 2017. All of these didn't necessarily come out in 2017, but I read them in 2017, although there are some new releases on that list. I needed to cheat a little bit this year, so instead of making my two videos where I split up fantasy and sci-fi from contemporary and thriller, I've also added a third favorite category, and that is for favorite debuts. So that way I'm able to incorporate some of the other books into this list that I really enjoyed and I really wanted to share with you and to just highlight because they were really just standout books that I read throughout the year. And I think that's fair to pick 28 books that I really loved, but I read 125 books, so alrighty, here we go. The first book on my list is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is the first book in a new series and it is so beautifully written, just like Laini's other work. This just immediately drew me in from the first page. I loved that the main character, Laszlo, is a librarian and he becomes obsessed with this mysterious town called Weep that no one can remember the name of, and when an opportunity arises for him to go and explore that town and that history and try to figure out what happened, he does whatever he can to be with those people who are going there to explore. He was such an empathetic character and I really enjoyed reading from his perspective. Just the whole concept behind this book was so interesting because it's two sides kind of warring with each other, but there's really no clear hero or villain in the story. There's just two sides to this story. It was such a wonderful read. I read the whole thing largely in one sitting on my 9.5 plane hour ride from Alaska back to New York. I loved this one. This is for sure one of my favorite fantasy books of the year and one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. Number 2 on my list is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. I'm so happy that I finally got to this one. I had tried to read it last year when it first came out, but the annotations had really thrown me off and I couldn't concentrate because I was in a noisy place, but I'm so glad that I decided to give this book another shot because I ended up really loving it. This is a very adult fantasy book, so if you're sensitive to very graphic subject matter, I would steer clear of this one. It really has some pretty graphic sex scenes and some pretty graphic and brutal fight scenes. Jay Kristoff does not hold back in this book, but I really enjoyed it. I really liked Mia, the main character, who goes to this assassin school in order to learn how to exact revenge on these couple of political figures that tore her family apart when she was younger. She has this like shadow cat that follows her and he eats her fear, so she's a completely fearless girl and the cat is very snarky, so I really enjoyed their relationship. Once I got into the part where she was actually like at the school, that's when it really picked up for me and I was just totally intrigued by this story and I really loved it and I cannot wait to read God's Grave. Number 3 on my list is Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. This is definitely more like paranormal. This is the second book in the Diviners Quartet and I loved it to pieces. They introduced a new character in this book who has become one of my favorite characters in the series. Just like with the first book, I really enjoyed just seeing a historical view of New York and not necessarily the view that we always get through other media. So instead of just seeing the flappers, even though we do see that with Evie, we also get to see Chinatown in the 20s, we also get to see Harlem in the 20s, all of these different areas of the city that I am currently familiar with, just to see how they would have been back then and how they were developing and becoming what they are today. So that just fascinated me. But this whole book really raised the stakes for every character involved in this story, and I am so excited to read the third book, which I'm planning on reading in 2018, but I want to wait until a little bit closer to when the fourth book might come out. I also think that I want to reread The Diviners and Lair of Dreams on audio because this story is just incredible and I just wish that more people would talk about it. I know some people talk about it and love it, but it's honestly one of the best YA series that is currently running, in my opinion. Number 4 on my list is Warcross by Marie Lu. This was a sci-fi novel and it follows a girl named Emika Chen who is a bounty hunter within this game called Warcross. She does something during the championships, glitches herself into the game, and then she gets whisked away to Tokyo by the creator himself, Hideo Tanaka, and he offers her a position to try to discover a security breach that's happened within the game. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It really reminded me of Sword Art Online, if you're familiar with that anime. And if you're not, you should totally watch it because it's great. But it was really fun and it was really different from a lot of other video game books that I have read. This is actually just a duology, so the conclusion should be out next year, which is also nice because I love that duologies are a thing now. Number 5 on my list is another way that I am kind of cheating. That is Lady Midnight's and Lord of Shadows, both by Cassandra Clare. I read both of these within the year of 2017. I had finished reading through all of the Mortal Instruments books, the Infernal Devices books, and the Shadowhunter Chronicles, and I read Lady Midnight just in time to be caught up to read Lord of Shadows. I loved both of them so much. I really enjoyed following this new set of characters within the Shadowhunter world. I feel like they are way more diverse, they're way more interesting, and I just fell in love with this family, the Blackthorn family. I can honestly say that they are my second favorite family in all of fiction, next to the Weasley family. They're just this huge family who love each other so much, and it's so adorable, and I really loved just seeing the escapades and the things that they got themselves into. There's like some angst in it, but it's like great. This is really tied for me with Infernal Devices for best books that Cassandra Clare has ever written. Next on my list is Mortal Heart by Robin Lefevers. This is the third and used to be final book in the His Fair Assassin trilogy, but Robin Lefevers is actually going to be coming out with another book in the series, which I'm pretty excited about. I think it's supposed to come out next year. All of these are companion novels, and they follow these women. They're assassins for death, so they carry out his wishes. It also takes place in Brittany in it's either the 1400s or the 1500s, now I can't remember, but a lot of the political drama that occurs within these books is actually fact. The author embellished upon it a little bit to add a little bit more intrigue to the story, but she outlines at the end of the book what was actually fact, and I was just blown away by like all of the things that happened in the history of this country. I could not believe that this happened. There's a lot of politics, and I really, really loved this one, and this one actually ended up being my favorite book in the trilogy. Number 7 on my list is A Conjuring of Light by Victoria Schwab. This is the third and final book in the Shades of Magic series. I thought this was an amazing conclusion. I know that there are some mixed opinions on this one, especially because it's so long and a lot of people felt like it didn't need to be as long as it was, but I thought it was wonderful, and I was so thankful for every word that Victoria Schwab put into this, and I would have read 600 more pages if she were to write them. Everything that she did with the characters in this was just what I wanted. Some things I didn't even know I wanted until she did them, but I loved it so much. Also really looking forward to her next trilogy that's set in this world, which is the Threads of Power trilogy, but sad that we have to wait until 2019. Next on my list is The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. This one was so unique. It's really unlike any other story that I have ever read. I loved it so much, and there were kind of like several stories going on all at once within this. It follows a girl named Alice whose grandmother is famous for writing this book of dark fairy tales that has garnered a cult following, but it's gone out of print, and mysterious things happen when people try to obtain a copy of that book. Alice's grandmother passes away, and then Alice's mother gets kidnapped. The only clue that she has is a message from her mom saying not to go to the hinterland, which is the estate that her grandmother lived on. So of course, Alice does not heed that warning. She goes straight to the hinterland to try to save her mother. She finds out that these dark fairy tales that her grandma wrote, there might be some truth to them. And it was just so great. The writing was beautiful. The story was absolutely incredible. The imagery and the description in here really enthralled me. And I loved this one so much. And even though this is a debut, I couldn't include it in my debut video because I did a video of 2017 debuts, and this one is actually a 2018 debut. That is why it's in this video instead of the other one. Number 9 on my list is Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This is the first book in the Expanse series, and this is a sci-fi novel. It is like an epic space novel. I loved it, obviously, because it's on this list. This had been one that I had wanted to read for the entire year. I kept putting it off, and it ended up being one of the last books that I read, like at the beginning of December, and it has definitely secured a place upon my favorites list. It's really long, and it's sci-fi, so it always takes me a little bit longer to read sci-fi than it does other genres, but this was so worth it for me. I thought the world was so well developed and so well explained to the reader. I actually already watched the first season of the television show, and the book filled in a lot of gaps that I feel like were not covered within the TV show. And I'm actually really interested in rewatching to compare what I read in the book to what they actually put on screen, now that I have like a fuller understanding. It was great. I really want to continue the series. It's going to be 9 books, so it's like a really long series. It's pretty much like the sci-fi Game of Thrones. It's a super long epic. There was already so much that happened in the first book. It was so action-packed and had a lot of elements within it that I enjoy in sci-fi. And finally, my favorite book of the year, which will come as no surprise to anyone, is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. Obviously, this was going to be on the list. This is, again, Game of Thrones. This is the Game of Thrones of fairies. It follows a girl named Jude who goes to live in the world of fairy after her parents are murdered, and despite being immortal, all she wants to do is just fit in with these fairies and secure a place in the court. There's a ton of political unrest, and Jude doesn't even know what she's getting herself into, but wow. This book was so good. I'm so glad that I read The Darkest Part of the Forest now too, because there are a couple of characters in The Cruel Prince that were in The Darkest Part of the Forest, and now I'm gonna reread this one and appreciate it even more. But this was just absolutely incredible. Those are my top 10, kind of 11 if you count Lady Midnight and Lord of Shadows being 2 books, sci-fi and fantasy books that I read in 2017. Let me know if you read any of the ones that I mentioned, or if you're interested in reading them, and let me know what your favorite fantasy book of the year was and your favorite sci-fi book of the year, if you like both of those genres, or just, you know, one or the other if you only read one of them. That's all that I have for this video, and I will see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!